Good evening, and welcome to the last session of the day. First of all, thank you to you all for making it till the end, and thank you to the interpreters in the booth over there. Thank you so much. I am sure I speak for all the panelists here when I start by thanking the organizers of the Congress, ECPM, and particularly Ariane. I also want to thank the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty for bringing us all together in this panel, and to the sponsor of the Congress. My name is Chiara San Giorgio, and I work as a policy advisor in the death penalty team at the International Secretariat of Amnesty International. And I am particularly honored to be here representing Amnesty International on this topic, which is the lack of transparency on the use of the death penalty and how it impacts the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of the death penalty. As you know, Amnesty International publishes yearly a report that covers what we know and what we can safely infer with regard to executions and the sentences and the number of people on death row across the world. We have been doing that since 1979. We are very aware of the limitations that our reporting has, but we do that with the aim of contributing towards debates on and challenges on the use of the death penalty. We have seen that the more we inform people about the death penalty, the more people change their mind and support abolition. We have seen that transparency is key to legal challenges, whether it is in individual cases or for constitutional matters. So it's we very much feel like this is a very small contribution towards bringing out some of the important stories that are behind the numbers. We are not alone doing this work. There are amazing databases compiled by many of you. Just to mention a couple, the Death Penalty Information Center for the US, the Justice Project in Pakistan. So there is more and more a feeling that as a movement, we have been trying to plug in the gaps and up the pressure on governments to become transparent on the use of the death penalty. Why transparency is important, as I mentioned, it's very key to the promotion and protection of human rights, from the right to a fair trial to the right not to be subjected to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. It is key in challenges to discrimination and supporting people from being free from discrimination. It is key when it comes to the right to privacy. We've seen some of new challenges coming up on that, and many more of the human rights that are core and intersect with the work on the death penalty. In today's panel, we'll take you on a small tour of the world to try to tease out some more of these aspects of transparency, of lack of transparency, and how it impacts our work. I am joined by 6 amazing and distinguished panelists, starting from the end on this side. We have Professor Javed Rahman, who is a special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Professor Zhao Wukong, who is a lawyer and who is the head of the Department of Constitutional Law and Administrative Law and professor at the Vietnam National University, and he works on corruption, transparency, and freedom of expression. We have Mr. Hideo Hiraoka, who is a lawyer. He's a member of Crime Info and of the Japanese Federation of the Bar Association. He was the Minister of Justice of Japan between 2011 and 2012. Continuing on this side, Madame Shaima Kabawi, who is a member of the United Families Collective. She is the sister of Bilal Kabawi. Is a French citizen arrested in Syria and sentenced to death in Iraq in June 2019. We also have Maitre Nestor Toko, who is a lawyer in Cameroon. He's the founder of Droit et Paix and the president of the Cameroonian Lawyers Network Against the Death Penalty. And finally, Dr. Tobias Smith. He's a researcher and assistant professor of administration of justice at Hoyoni College. He specializes in criminal sanctions as well as American and Chinese law. I just gave you a very brief kind of summary of who they are, but you can find more information on their biography, but also on their work and some of the presentation on the countries that they're going to cover in the app of the Congress. So feel free to check it out in the session here. We have divided and prepared the questions so that we can have a smooth run. We have divided the conversation in 3 segments. And in the first one, we are going to start by looking at the impact of the lack of transparency on people. And I'm going to start by Madame Kabawi. Ready? Yes. OK, the first question is for you, and it relates to your brother, who, as we mentioned, is under sentence of death in Iraq. In itself must be a harrowing experience, and as we're going to hear, has been compounded by the lack of transparency in the case. So can you tell us a bit about what's been happening, but also what could have made the situation better if transparency had been there and if you had full access to information? Thank you.
Bonjour, je me présente. Hello, I would like to introduce myself, Madame Kawawi. Je suis la petite sœur. I am the younger sister of Monsieur Kawawi, who was sentenced to death in Iraq. My brother was sentenced with 10 other French citizens. He was held in detention in Syria. They have been transferred to Iraq. In 2019, with a lot of confidentiality, so the transfer was not made public to the Islamic State. So all of these prisoners have been sentenced to death. So in order to respond to your question, lack of transparency makes it unsupportable for the families. So we get information late or just fragmented from the side of the French government, so we don't know much about our family members and the process, the trial, not even about detention, where they have been detained. None of these prisoners have been arrested on Iraqi soil, in Iraqi territory, so they have all been transferred from Syria to Iraq, and the authorities on site have never ever given us any information about the transfer, neither French or the Kurdish, Iraqi or Syrian authorities. So the different NGOs, they have all underlined the role of France in this transfer. And my country has decided to accept that these French citizens have been sentenced to death. So it's a violation of international law, and the engagement of France regarding the transfer of its citizens has been violated again. So they are sentenced to death. So for us, we are French citizens. It's a special pain that our country that stands for the respect of human rights and against death penalty accepts the contrary. So the principles that we have been defending for 40 years are violated here. So we learned about this transfer by the press and by the judgment. So the hearings took place in Baghdad, beginning of June. We were informed about the sentence to death by hanging. So this lack of information has stopped us from having lawyers on site and present during the hearing. There was a representative of the French consulate that was at each hearing and assisted in it. So the special rapporteurs of United Nations and the NGOs described the unfair type of process that my brother and the other prisoners were subject to. So we, the families, we got just some information from the press, and the French authorities have not given us any information. We have never received any minutes of the hearing. Why has France accepted to transfer its citizens and prisoners to a country that applies the death penalty? So we don't know. We don't ask that my brother and the other prisoners are remain unpunished, but we want that France ensures, well, they are responsible for the transfer, and we want to have some explanation from them on the reasoning behind it. And at least it needs to be justified why they have been sentenced to death, since they are French citizens. So why is there so much silence? There would have been other solutions with judges in France that could have been responsible for the trial, and in a different legal framework. In 2019, the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, said that he would do whatever he could so that the death penalty is commuted into life imprisonments, and we still don't know anything about the transfer nor about the circumstances, and no sentencing has been commuted. So we are not informed about any appeals. We don't even know if there is a possibility of an appeal. We don't know if France is involved in any negotiation or any possibility to transfer these French citizens to France. So we would have loved to get some information on what is actually going on and what is going to go on. So we wanted to get some reaction or response from our government. Why has France not listened to the families? Because until today, no family has received any assistance or support, psychological or any other type of support. No meeting has taken place, except for convocations to the intelligence services by telephone. So we've been intimidated. One has looked into our private lives. We were completely lost as families in view of that situation. So we feel completely without any possibility to respond. It's a terrible psychological situation for us as well. And for my brother and the other prisoners, they live under terrible conditions. After each visit of the representative from the consulate, we don't get any information. We can, from time to time, once in 2 or 3 months, talk to them over the phone, but we cannot send any letters or any parcels, nor have any other contact with them. It's 5 years now that we are completely isolated. France has fantastic relations with Iraq, but everything seems to be highly complicated, and our government does not respond or react. The situation is already very difficult for us, and we would love that France responded, that they gave us some assistance, some help, or that they helped to improve the conditions of detention and imprisonment. France is a rule of law country, which has no death penalty anymore since 1981. So it is our Minister of Justice who is responsible for the abolition of life sentences, and we live in a democratic country, and that country should look after the rights of its citizens. No French person has been executed for the last 4 decades, but now the families of these prisoners are left alone, very unhappy. We are sort of pushed to the side by the French authorities. We have no guarantee that our family members are not executed today, tomorrow, or at any other point in time, and I'm sorry. But we have the feeling that the dossiers, the files are kept closed, and we want that we who have contributed so much to abolishing death penalties in the world, we see that our own citizens are now subject to this punishment. We want that these prisoners are transferred to France, and we want that the families that have suffered so much these past years are kept informed or are receiving whatever help. I would like to wrap up by saying that 11 prisoners, French citizens, have been sentenced to death in Iraq. Among them, my brother Leonardo Peze, Brian Ejara, Vianney Oraghi, Mourad Delhomme, Karim El Arshawi, Salim Machou, Kevin Gono, Mustafa Merzoughi, Yassin Sakam, and Fodil Tarawidat. These men are French citizens, have French passports. They have parents, grandparents, brothers, they have sisters, they have cousins, they have nephews, nieces, they have children. We should not forget them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing at a great personal cost. So thank you, really appreciate it. Next, I'm going to turn to Mr. Hiraoka. So you were the former Minister of Justice of Japan, and let me note that you didn't sign any execution warrants. Thank you for that leadership. I wanted to ask you about the contradiction that we see on the part of the Japanese authorities on keeping everything very secret about the execution with the justification that it would be better for those facing execution and their family members not to know about it. Can you help us understand a bit more about this practice and what's the rationale and how can we challenge that and what's been happening in Japan? Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Let me introduce myself first. And I'm from the Japan Federation of Bar Association, JFBA, the only nationwide association of lawyers with compulsory membership. I'm honored to be invited here to share my thoughts with you, as I was the 88th Minister of Justice from 2011 to 2012, under the administration of the Democratic Party of Japan. Frankly speaking, I was not an active abolitionist when I was first appointed to the post. My predecessor, Mr. Eda, former judge, had never signed an execution order during his tenure. The last execution before me were carried out under Ms. Chiba in 2010, contrary to her famous career as an abolitionist of the parliamentary group of Amnesty. Hesitating for a long time at first, she finally signed the order and viewed the scene of the execution. A cruel experience indeed. So she decided to call for deep discussion about the death penalty within the Ministry of Justice. I continued the discussion that she had started, but it was not so easy. During every commission meeting in the Diet, fervent supporters of death penalty persistently asked me when I would order executions by pointing to ministerial responsibility. I answered them by setting up a large study group to organize a nationwide discussion on the death penalty from every aspect of the matter. Unfortunately, before finalizing the project, I had to leave the ministry. Today, I am a senior counselor in the Commission on the Death Penalty of the JFBA. Japan is an active retentionist, the only one country in 38 OECD members. This is very serious. Let's try our best to move away globally from the death penalty. As you know, Japan is renowned for its safety and cleanliness. In regard to death penalty, however, you may have another picture. It's retentionist with not such a big number of executions, 3 or 4 annually from 2012, with the exception of 15 in 2018, under the rule of the Liberal Democratic Party. and the number of the death row inmates is relatively small, 107 as of 2022. But I regret that our government is too stubborn to change. I should say that 4 times already the Human Rights Committee has presented almost the same recommendations in this regard to the Japanese government. It has become a common thing that the embassies from European countries read protest statements against each and every execution. The government appears to have the ears and the blind eye to such a common and important issue in the democracy. In this globalized world, is it acceptable to adhere to a so-called cultural relativism in this very serious matter of life or death? Is it rational now to keep the doors closed, blocking insight into the real world of capital punishment? Is this justified international human rights law to hide or cover the real sin of the death penalty? The death row inmates, don't they suffer from solitary confinement day and night? Don't they suffer by cutting off their communication with the outside world? Do they receive adequate health care? Don't they suffer from mental illness? As for the lack of the transparency in the death penalty system in Japan, I think we have to tackle 2 groups of problems: lack of transparency in the execution itself and in the treatment of death row inmates. A lack of transparency in the phase of execution. Japan is notorious for its traditional policy of keeping everything secret and everyone in the dark about the reality of the execution. Prison officers and bureaucrats in the Ministry of Justice are all strictly disciplined to keep secret. Even the minister, including me, doesn't know in what exact order and the execution is going to be carried out. A terrible story has been disclosed by a lawyer who used to be Secretary General at Amnesty International Japan. On December 21st, 2021, the lawyer heard on the way to the detention center that 3 inmates were seemingly executed that morning. Getting to the center, he asked to see his client for the trial, only to be told that while searching carefully, the officer could find that person nowhere. 1 hour later, 1 hour after that, the minister announced the execution in a press conference. Confidentiality prevails. Right to retire and right to life are denied. In addition, the right to know isn't respected either. Lack of transparency in the treatment of inmates is also very serious. Even when sentenced to death, the accused can be interviewed by press as well as send and receive letters and writings from and to anyone before the sentence gets final and binding. On the contrary, the death row inmate is kept strictly in secret. His contact with outside world is strictly limited under pretense of needed maintenance of his peace of mind. Wardens of penal institutions have almost absolute discretion in this regard. Generally, any administrative documents officially made are to be disclosed on demand, but it is not the case with the documents made by the prison authorities in regard to day-to-day treatment and behavior of the executed. almost everything is hidden before the public, and every effort to unveil the real scene of the execution and also the treatment is unfortunately in vain. We need to cast more light on these situations. Let us begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let us continue as well. Maître Toko, we are going to ask you if you can tell us, based on your experience as a lawyer and representing your clients in Cameroon, about how the lack of transparency has affected their right to a fair trial, but also if you can tell us a bit how things changed during the pandemic and in relation to the right to a fair trial and your ability to represent your clients. Thank you.
Bien, merci.
Thank you very much. Toko Nestor, president of the network of lawyers fighting against capital punishment in civil society in Cameroon, where our organization consists of lawyers. We help and defend persons that are on the death row. So it's a defense organization. And in this capacity, I have been able to be confronted to the lack of transparency when it comes to representing persons on death row. The death penalty, in the process, in the trial already, there is a lot of lack of transparency. The standards are not always applied. Cameroon has ratified a number of legal texts that guarantee the right to have a lawyer to defend you in court. And the application of this text is still a challenge on a daily basis. So just one example, the right that has recognized that a person can benefit from legal counseling is not always respected. There is a file where my client described that it was very difficult for him to get in touch with me. I had problems contacting the person because it was said that the case was severe and had some implications with national importance, and later on I heard that my client had been exploitation in the sense that when I had the first opportunity to question him and to talk to him, then I received some information from him personally. And everything was done in a certain confidentiality and secrecy. So he had been exploited, and it was difficult for my client to be to express himself, and therefore I couldn't work in a way that was efficient. So the declaration that was made this declaration was that he made was made under torture, but the judge didn't believe in that. He wanted to have some evidence that this declaration of my client was made under pressure. And for a lawyer, it is very difficult to provide that evidence, to supply that evidence to the court. And as a defense, you feel weakened. You are weakened when the advice, you have not the possibility to have access to the different procedures and different stages. And capital punishment in Cameroon means that the judge needs to be sure that the person who is sentenced has received legal advice. But very often
les juges désignent à
the
l'audience
judges
des avocats à qui ils demandent
in the hearing, they ask the legal defense for evidence that you just cannot supply. So you have no time to exchange with your client and to verify that the accusation against the client is justified. So this is not an efficient way of defending your client. The second challenge that you are confronted with as a lawyer is that it's a technique that allows the judge to make the lawyer docile, which we call it's a sort of something that takes place behind closed doors. In our system, the trial needs to be public, a public trial, and it's exceptional that a trial takes place behind closed doors when it's about preserving public order only. But the magistrate, the judge, can order to have a hearing behind closed doors with excluding the public if the defense has revelations to make in that case. It's a certain technique that is used and allows that the public cannot participate in the trial and cannot attend, and then the dossier or the case, then it's all to the defense lawyer to look into the facts. When the defense takes the stage and expresses himself or herself, then the judge can stop them until the lawyer is, so to speak, silenced. And these are obstacles that mean that we cannot really exercise our profession in a decent manner. These are techniques that are used to bring in a witness or make sure that the witness is taken out of the case, or that even the lawyers that suffer from threats or that suffer from a high level of pressure, that they think twice about their attitude in this type of defense system. So these are the challenges that we experience on a daily basis. And it is the lawyer who, day after day, is faced with that sort of challenge, and that, of course, has a negative impact on the defense system, on the defense of the client. So, although there are these challenges, we try to provide best possible consulting and defense to our clients. One of the measures that the government has taken and that has had a negative impact on the defense is this restriction of visiting the prisoners and the clients in prison, in detention. It has always been difficult for the lawyers to meet with their clients, to prepare them for the trial and prepare the defense. And we have a choice between abandoning them or have an exchange with them, just briefly standing already during the trial, during the hearing, so in a very brief personal meeting. And COVID-19 has meant that, in spite of that, lots of lawyers continue to work on the files, on the cases that they have been assigned to.
Merci. Professor Wukong, can we turn to you? Perfect. So we know very little about the figures with regard to the use of the death penalty in Vietnam. We have started to get some snippets of information here and there, but we also seem to know more about the conditions of detention. So my first question is, can you help us figure out what's happening and what's known about life on death row in Vietnam? The first question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. And I am professor, university lecturer, so I do not know much about the specific case of the death penalty. So I can only talk about, how to say, the legal framework and general situation of death penalty in relation, especially in relation to transparency in Vietnam. So firstly, I would like to say that the use of death penalty in Vietnam is the sensitive issue. So we have very little information available. Actually, in the past, the information about the death penalty were quite transparency. But since 2011, the government considered the death penalty statistic is the state secret. So no one knows exactly how many people are sentenced to death and how many people, how many death row inmates are executed each year. However, from some, how to say, available sources, for example, from the local media and local lawyer, we can see somewhat something about the condition of the death row inmate in Vietnam. And I found that it is slightly improved recent year. However, it's still quite severe, rather severe, like in many other Asian countries, I think so. So death row inmates in Vietnam are kept in separate area of the detention center, and they are monitored much more strictly than ordinary prisoner. Each death row inmate is kept in a very narrow cell. I think it's only a few square meters, and the prisoner cell for the death row inmate is monitored 20 hours per day, and all activity of the death row inmate are carried out in the cell. So the law of Vietnam stipulated that only in the case of death row inmate commit suicide or escape from the prison or commit other dangerous act, they will be, how to say, shackled one neck. However, this provision is often abused to apply for, how to say, all the death row inmate. I mean, all the death row inmate are often shackled. When being shackled, death row inmates are allowed to change their leg at least once a week, and they are only allowed to open the leg shackle once a day, each time for no more than 15 minutes. For them to do some, how to say, personal hygiene. The diet of the death row inmate in Vietnam is the same as the ordinary prisoner. 6 death row inmates are, in principle, medically treated in the cell. Why, though, however, if, for those who are seriously ill, they can move to the, how to say, outside medical facility for treatment. So in that case, they are, how to say, kept in a separate room, and they are subject to very strict supervision. So according to the law of Vietnam, the death row inmate can only meet their relative at the prison, and a number of the time they can meet for their relative depend on the condition of the detention center, and it's decided by the head of the detention center, but no more than once a month, and no more than 1 hour each time. So if the relative of the death row inmate are foreigner, they must be approved by the Ministry of Public Security for visiting, and the relatives are only allowed to see the death row inmate in a visiting room. It's not in the cell. And when the meeting, the relative, the death row inmate are still shackled and subject to the close, very strict supervision by the prison officer. So, and also according to the law of Vietnam, the death row inmates are allowed to send unused personal belonging to their relative at home. And at the same time, they can receive gift, money and daily life supply sent by their relative to the prisoner, but no more than twice a month. And they can also receive and send the letter if permitted by the head of the detention center. And so in general, I think similar to the many Asian countries, the detention condition of the death row inmate in Vietnam is the hard. And in addition to the long incarceration, as reported by local media, I found that some death row inmates have attempted to commit suicide because they cannot, they don't want to stay to live long in the cell, while some other death row inmates have asked for their early execution. Thank you.
And just a follow-up question, what would be the actions that can be put in place to improve these harsh conditions, and what can we do?
Thank you. So I'm afraid that it's not easy to take any immediate action to improve the condition of detention and access to the facing the death penalty in Vietnam, because the prison system of Vietnam is rather closed. It's quite difficult to access, especially for the civil society organization. In principle, according to the law of Vietnam, the prisoners are supervised by the people, by the court and by some subject. It's not a state agency. It's not for the local media or local civil society organization. That is, I think, that's a big problem. So in addition to that, the government of Vietnam is so far is often reluctant to accept any recommendation on the death penalty or the other human rights issue as well. So any campaigning for human rights in general and for the death penalty abolition in particular in Vietnam is very difficult, I think so. However, I think it's more common now, often done by some important partner, foreign partner of Vietnam, for example, the EU or USA or Australia or some other country. They have the human rights dialogue, daily annual human rights dialogue with government of Vietnam. And so, but in the human rights dialogue, they have many, many various issues of human rights. But I found that in recent years, they often raise the issue of death penalty, including the transparency and the condition of the death row inmate and so on. So I think it's one of the most feasible and practical, and I think we can do to improve the condition of the death row inmate in Vietnam. And I think another solution is that we can cooperate with, we can support the local media and local academic community to do some recommendation to the government of Vietnam. And it is now, I think it's feasible because the government of Vietnam is more and more open with local media and local academic community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for finishing on this positive note. Thank you. So for the final segment for this conversation, we're going to focus more on how the lack of transparency impacts our work as an abolitionist community and kind of steps that we can take in that direction. And we're going to start from Dr. Tobias Smith, starting on China. Can you tell us about the secrecy on the figures and how that intertwines with the control and censorship on public debates, whether online or offline, and kind of focusing on China? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, Kira. Let me start with a few basic facts. I think everyone in the room probably already knows them, but I want to say them again. So first, it's widely understood that China executes more people than any other country in the world. Second, the exact number of executions is a state secret. In fact, China is one of only a small number of countries that criminalizes disclosure of that information, Vietnam being another one. And this is, of course, a matter of great international interest. So Amnesty every year publishes its report, and we always see that first on the list of leading executioner states is China, and we always see that it says thousands. We don't get an exact number. For many years, this has been the case. And third, the third fact that I want to emphasize is that China is an authoritarian one-party state. Now, not all states that operate with death penalty secrecy are. My fellow panelists speaking about Japan can speak to the fact that democracies also use death penalty secrecy. But being an authoritarian one-party state influences how a state can impose secrecy controls. So for China in particular, of course, China is a repressive state, and it can use repression, can repress individuals who attempt to disclose this information. But most Chinese citizens don't have specific information about the annual execution rate. Most Chinese citizens are influenced not by repression, but by state propaganda. So the Chinese government controls media, controls schools and education, and in this way actually talks a lot about the death penalty. But when it talks about the death penalty, it talks about it in particular ways. It talks about what it sees as positive reforms. It influences the conversation, or it talks about particular cases that help make the case for retaining capital punishment. So as a result, even though this is a secretive state and this is a repressive state, I think actually the most powerful and challenging issue around discourse about the death penalty in China is actually the way that the Chinese state shapes rather than represses that information.
Just to spell it out a bit more, so how does that impact discussions on abolition? Like, can you tell us?
That's a great question. Okay, so maybe I can break it into three constituencies. So we'll talk first about the average Chinese citizen. So as I've said, the average Chinese citizen doesn't have any secret or intimate knowledge about the death penalty. The average Chinese citizen reads the newspaper and reads about the death penalty and is impacted by state messaging, right? So the average Chinese citizen may have feelings about a particular case or a particular reform, but probably doesn't have strong feelings about retention or abolition. Or to the degree that they do, they've been convinced by long-standing stories that it's part of a cultural tradition or that it's necessary to maintain order in such a large country. It's very difficult to change perceptions for the average individual. We have a second constituency, and that is folks like the people here at this Congress. It's lawyers, cause lawyers, activist lawyers. These are the folks you read about in the newspaper. Outside of China, that is. This is a small group of people. These people are committed not just to abolition, but to other kinds of basic reforms. So rule of law reform, transparency reform. They're aware of the arguments in favor of abolition, and they support them. They have a more challenging time because they are more of a threat to the state. And so they do face repression. But that repression isn't just about their abolitionist position. It's also about the wider political position that they're upholding, right? And so this is my first time at the Congress. My understanding is that in past Congresses, there have been more representatives from China. In fact, I'm not sure there are any here this year, or if not, maybe very few. I've talked to a few folks who wanted to come and couldn't because they do face increasing political repression. So that's very real for this second constituency, lawyers. Let me talk about a third constituency. This is a group that we probably don't think about enough, in my opinion, in this movement, and that is government officials. So why should we care about government officials? Well, we know from all of the research on the death penalty that it's elites who, as often as not, make changes to abolish the death penalty. They certainly have the most direct route to change. A committed leader, a committed member of the judiciary, can sweep away capital punishment in a regime very quickly. And it's officials who are most impacted by transparency laws, right? We have jurists in China, we have tens of thousands of judges who handle capital cases. And they're the ones who have the statistics, and they're the ones who are directly sanctioned for releasing them. So if you are an official, if you're a prosecutor, if you're a judge, if you're a party official, if you're a leader, you are most aware of how secret this information is, and you're less likely to want to talk about it. So maybe you hold abolitionist views. You may even hold them for instrumental reasons. You may recognize that in a massive bureaucracy like China, that so many executions are actually a real drain on your goals. But it becomes difficult to have this conversation when you're facing restrictions, when you're worried that talking about your work is going to disclose that information. So those are the three constituencies. I'll stop there.
And do you think having figures on China would help us do a better job in terms of advocating for abolition?
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Do you think if we had figures on China, would that be helping us?
That's a great question. I get that question a lot, right? We all want to know, what's the number? What's the number? And let me start by saying, of course, we should know what the number is, right? For international human rights reasons, in terms of legal obligations, China absolutely needs to disclose how many people it's executing every year. Would that catalyze abolition? I'm not so sure. I don't know if that's the answer. I think that actually what we need to better understand is what this regime of secrecy is doing or not doing for this state, why leaders insist on it, and how it actually may be obstructing their goals. Because regardless of whether the number is a low 3-digit number or a low 4-digit number, it's going to be a shockingly large number. We've known that for many years, and it doesn't seem that that number alone is going to drive abolition.
Okay, maybe one to discuss. Thank you. And thank you for coming to the World Congress. So we learned yesterday what they say in Mongolia about the last camel, which is always the heaviest. Professor Rehman, thank you for coming. So we would like to ask you, based on your experience as Special Rapporteur on the situation on human rights in Iran, how lack of transparency and challenges to accessing information and on cases affects your work and your important advocacy to improve the situation on human rights in Iran. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. So let me make 2 key points in this brief presentations. One is related to this particular subject that we're discussing. An overwhelming majority of the executions within the Islamic Republic of Iran are not made public, and there is therefore a complete lack of transparency. And this transparency extends to absence of data on the numbers, on the timings of these executions, on the ethnicity of individuals affected, on the gender, age, or religion of the persons who are executed. So there is a huge amount of lack of transparency. The other key point, if I may take this opportunity to make, is that almost all of the death sentences implemented in the Islamic Republic of Iran amount to an arbitrary deprivation of life, and therefore it is a violation of Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which the Islamic Republic of Iran is a state party. So what are the two, in relation to these 2 points, what are the key concerns? Firstly, if you look at the Islamic Penal Code and if you look at the criminal laws of the Islamic Republic of Iran, you'd find that there are over 80 offenses in national laws that are not the most serious crimes as we know it, and yet they carry the death penalty. So just to give you an example of these extensive imposition of the death penalty, you have adultery, incest, rape, same-sex relations, you have blasphemy, you have theft and alcohol consumption for 4th conviction, there's death penalty. You have national security offenses such as muharabe, which is taking up arms to take life or property or create fear in public. And these are very imaginative, widely drawn offenses. And we are afraid that a number of the current protesters are also going to be categorized within that particular, offense. Then you have afsad fil ard, which is corruption on earth. You have baghi, which is armed rebellion. You have a very serious issue arising of the drug offenses. And we have a rising escalation of people convicted of drug offenses. If I have time, I'd go into some statistics. Then you have death penalty for fraud, economic crimes, prostitution, trafficking in persons. And the key point to note here is that there is this criminalization of activities, such as I mentioned, same-sex relations, adultery, apostasy, blasphemy, and for drinking alcohol for 4 convictions, which violate the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, because these should not be offenses in the first place, let alone having this punishment of death penalty attached to them. So if I have time, I can briefly allude to the drug offender executions, because we have seen a really worrying trend since 2021 of the escalation. So just the figures from this year, of the first half, we had 80 individuals, at least 80 individuals who were executed for drug offender charges. In 2021, there were 126 executions, which included 5 women and 4 Afghans. I'm not sure if we have the time now, but Iran amended its anti-narcotics laws in 2017. And there was a sharp decrease from 2017 to 2020 in terms of the number of people who were executed for drug offender charges. But as I mentioned, since 2021, there has been a dramatic increase in these executions. And the few concerns from that. One is that it is obviously not the most serious offense as we know it, but it also constitutes arbitrary deprivation of life in the sense that it targets people living in poverty. It targets ethnic minorities, in particular the Balochis. So, for example, in 2021, we had at least 70 Balochis who were executed, and which amounted to 44% of all of the drug-related executions. And another disturbing factor, and I think some of the colleagues here have mentioned, is the violations of due process rights when these executions do take place. So we find overwhelming evidence of confessions obtained through torture, solitary confinements. There is an absence of access to lawyers. And even if the lawyers were allowed to represent their clients, they're not afforded opportunity to defend the cases, you see. And worst of all, you may know that a lot of these drug-related cases and national security cases are tried in the notorious revolutionary courts, which are known for the absence of fair trial, denial of presumption of innocence, the key elements to due process rights. So, so there are these huge concerns. If I can just briefly take another couple of minutes. I mentioned to you the death penalty for very vague offenses, and my fear is that it's going to be used now in the current crisis. We know that indictments have already been issued for a number of protesters with death penalty charges, and that's a big concern. If I can just briefly close with one key point, is that Iran is one of the few countries which continues to execute child offenders, by which we mean people who are below the age of 18 when the offense is alleged to have been committed. And the situation is so dire, it is so bad, that girls as young as 9 and boys as young as 15, there is a gender discrimination as well, but girls as young as 9 and boys as young as 15 are liable to be executed. And in fact, we have seen a number of cases. Just this year, at least 2 child offenders were executed. And every year we have this deep concern emerging of children being executed, child offenders being executed in the Islamic Republic. I end here. There's a lot more to say, and I'm sure our audience would be interested to talk more about the current protests and the issue of death penalty, and I'd be happy to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we have some time for questions. Please keep the questions very brief and focused on the topic under discussion. And I'm not sure, do we have microphones going around? I cannot see any. Oh, sorry. Oh, we have a question there. Thank you.
I am Samir Nouri from Iraq, abolition death penalty of Iraq. First of all, I am asking Congress to have a proposal for condemning the Islamic Republic of Iran and supporting the revolution there, and we say the woman life freedom. That's, I think Congress deserves to have that resolution about Iran. That's the first one. Second one about Shema. I talk with the Shema. I am from Iraq. I am working in Baghdad. First of all, I tell her I am opening my arm for you and your family to help you. That's the first. But I have to tell you a hard words. ISIS is a barbaric movement, a barbaric, they killed a lot of people. They raped a woman. They destroyed 40% of Iraq. So that's very hard to do a decision. But I do that decision. I support you with your family. I say the death penalty not hurt just one person, but hurting the family like Shema and her family. And we help you. And I ask for the countries, US countries, pull out your citizens. In Iraq, it is hard to abolish the death penalty of these people. Thank you very much. We are with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the comment. On the first question, I think it's something that we cannot really answer. I think we all hear the concerns on Iran, and I think we'll discuss with the organizers if it's going to be mentioned in the declaration. Or, but I mean, I'll give you the floor in a second. Can I have the second question?
Yes. Bernard Boeton from Vivere, a Swiss NGO dealing with the death penalty for juveniles. I have a question for the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran. Yesterday there was one speaker who said to us that the statistics about the number of executions was decreasing before the elections, and then after the elections the figure is growing. It was in the discussion yesterday about the relation between death penalty and political issue. Can you, as a rapporteur, can you confirm this idea of link with the political agenda?
Thank you. Are you okay to take these two questions, and then I'll come to... Can I see, sorry, who else needs... Well, no, 1 second. I'll let him answer on Iran, and then I'll come back. I'll take 2 more.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very brief. Yes, I mean, since 16th of September of this year, we have seen the most serious and repressive brutality on the part of any state. We have seen over 300 persons killed by the security forces in Iran, which includes at least 40 children. You may remember that there was a Black Friday, 30th of September, in which at least 66 Balochis were slaughtered. So this is I mean, we must condemn in the strongest terms the behavior of the state, but we must go further than that. I mean, there has to be accountability for all of these individuals, for these perpetrators of these, I would say, crimes, murders, and crimes against humanity. So I would urge you all, in the strongest terms, to take action and to ask your government to actually ensure that accountability does take place. On the point about the decreasing numbers, well, what I would say is that the numbers actually were still quite high, but since Mr. Ibrahim Raisi has taken charge, the numbers have risen to an alarming, unprecedented level. So now we know that just in this year, there are at least 400 people, if not more, have been executed. And the repression of the state is unprecedented. This I can tell you. And the recent crisis has a lot to do with the way Mr. Ibrahim Raisi and his administration has violated the human dignity of girls and women. And I think this person must be held accountable for what he's done. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My name is Sholeh Zamini from All Human Rights for All in Iran. Special Rapporteur, thank you very much for all your reports and whatever you do. What I wanted to ask is, we had some press releases from your side and other Special Rapporteurs, and I suppose there have been also urgent action releases to the government of Iran. Has there been any reply or any try from the Islamic Republic of Iran to contact you to somehow justify whatever they are doing? First question. Second question, we know that the Islamic Republic of Iran and their authorities have most of the time spoken about the 80s was the best time, and that is the time when they slaughtered all prisoners of conscience in prisons. And we also know that the Evin prison was put on fire. I mean, there are reports of many more killings than what was actually announced at all. So have there been any kind of reaction from the government of Iran replying about your worriness about all these issues? Thank you.
I'll take some more questions, thank you. And then I'll come back and we group them together. I think there are a few. So the gentleman next to, sorry, the gentleman there. And then I'll come to you. Oh. And then there.
First of all, thank you for ECPM for organizing this Congress. It's the first time for me attending. My name is Bashir Naji. I am from the Egyptian Initiative Against Executions, and I would like to firstly thank all speakers who spoke today. And I would like to ask a question, and it's rather also an idea regarding how to protect the transparency of the countries that are abolishing the death penalty. So we know about the Security Council of the UN. We know about the treaty that was signed to stop the testing for nuclear weapons in the Geneva Congress, where there was a case study regarding these testings. So my idea was to, why not create or sign a treaty between all the countries that are against or that have a law to abolish the death penalty. Why not sign a treaty where we make sure that these countries abide with these rules, first of all? So we have like a Security Council, we have a special council to protect this law, number one. Number two, this council will also, in addition to the works of the individual organizations, will also cooperate together to try and not enforce, but rather try to talk to the other countries as well who don't have this abolishing law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I might respond to that one, but I'll see if others want to. Sorry, Sergio.
Oui, Richard Cedillo, administrateur.
I'm Richard Cedillo. I'd like to make a comment regarding Shaima. We got a little step forward when it comes to Iraq, because the judge in French just stated he is responsible for cases of torture and bad treatment. I can't talk about the whole file. I'm not entitled to do so. But when it comes to the whole proceedings, and when it comes to Iran, we heard what you were saying. You appeal to other countries. What do you think of the different movements of civil society, bar associations in favor of human rights? We are going to sign a document which is going to be signed by many organizations, by CPN and maybe by other participants of this Congress. Beyond these initiatives, what would you advise us to do? We are ready to listen to your suggestions, of course.
Thank you. Sorry, there was a gentleman there. Thank you. And
Thanks for the conversation. I really impressed to hear Iran story, but what make me more impressing that each story I hear for Iran, it's typically identically copy from Egypt, just replace Iran and put Egypt. My question is, do we really have action plan and vision to force and press over this government? Thanks.
Thank you so much. So we're taking another question, and then I'll come to you to address all the questions in Iran. Ravi first. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to share this experience. My name is Ravi. I'm a human rights lawyer from Singapore, and I would like to share the experience about two Singaporeans who are facing execution in China and another person in Vietnam. The reason why I'm bringing this issue, and particularly the questions raised about the secrecy of executions in these two countries, it is unfortunate that even a country like Singapore did not have much database of Singaporeans facing executions in foreign countries. I think this is one important part where Amnesty International and other organizations could actually have a database of their respective countries, nationalities facing executions in foreign country. And what I would like to share is that these two executions, especially the first one from China, the daughter of the mother who was facing the execution in China, she was saying that she's only 17 and she just contacted me and said that in a week's time her mother will be shot in China. But what I found out is that there are actually, though the very difficult procedures in China and Vietnam, these two cases have received attention of the courts and are being reviewed there because of the interventions that we proactively took. So what I'm saying is, if these countries, for example, China and Vietnam, if you find that it's like things have gone to the end of the road, there are still ways and means where you can still not give up and find that there can be petitions launched in these countries before the courts. Yeah.
Thank you. And can I ask for a round of applause for Ravi, because he hasn't told us, but he's been behind many challenges to the death penalty in Singapore. So thank you, Ravi. Can I give you the floor on some questions on Iran?
Yes. Again, I'm mindful that everybody needs to be involved, so I'll
be
very brief. Yeah. Okay, so one question, what are our responses? You would have seen the special procedures have issued a number of press releases. We have tried to engage the Islamic Republic of Iran. The difficulty and the real problem is that there is an absence of transparency in everything that the Iranian state does. And alongside that, there is an absence of accountability in everything that Iran does. Now, you may remember, and I hope that you know, that Gina Mahsa Amini was killed by the state on the 16th of September. But unfortunately, she was not the only young woman or the girl who has been killed by the state. These are these large figures of young girls and women, young people who have been killed by the state, including, as I mentioned, at least over 40 children. So there is a complete lack of transparency, complete lack of accountability in what the Islamic Republic does. We're consistently trying to engage with them, but they are not responding to me. They might be responding to some other procedures, but certainly they are really scared of what I'm telling them, so they don't want to engage with me. On the point of Evin Prison, as you know, there was a fire, and according to the state official acknowledgement, at least 8 prisoners were killed in those fires, and they have not been transparent. They have given a version which is unsustained, which is unsustainable. I understand that many of the prisoners were transferred to other prisons, and they are in very dire, very serious situation. Again, we're trying to engage the Islamic Republic of Iran, but with not much success is forthcoming. On the point of the civil society and the bar associations, I would say that is, I really appreciate and applaud all of these efforts, because they bring pressure on the international community and on the states themselves. Now, while the civil society outside of Iran is active, unfortunately, within Iran, the Iranian authorities have killed off all efforts to establish any form of civil society organizations. Some of you may know that the Imam Ali organization, which used to do a lot of commendable job, including supporting people on death penalty, child offenders, it was laid off, it was made redundant by the state itself. So there is a real issue in that sense. What I would urge you, as I've just said before, individually, collectively, to put the maximum amount of pressure, take these protests out, so that the international community recognizes the very serious violations of human rights, as I said, crimes against humanity being conducted on a large scale, killings of protesters being conducted by the state. So once this pressure is exerted, the states of the world know that they have to take action, and therefore we would see an international investigative mechanism being established to hold all of these perpetrators accountable for what they have been doing, at least since the 16th of September, if not before. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sorry. I'll take your question, and then just to answer very briefly on your suggestion on the UN Security Council. And so there are different mechanisms that we can already use, and maybe we can continue the conversation separately. I'm not sure if your idea is exactly what we have already available, but we can discuss more. And on the suggestion for a database, I think more and more countries have been putting out databases. Hopefully we'll get to a stage where we can map out between various organizations, Cornell University as well. We can map out in more detail who is actually on death row, and Oxford University as well are doing that database. So hopefully we'll get there, but thank you for suggesting. I'm going to take that question, and then I'm not sure if you have any final remarks that you want to share. Let me know. Sorry, there was a question. Yes, sorry. Can we have that gentleman there? Thank you. And there is one.
Thank you for the panel. I'm Osama Rushdi. I'm a former member of National Council for Human Rights in Egypt. Yeah, I would like to talk about Egypt. We have now, last 8 years, about 105 executed, already implemented, executed, and we have 95 waiting for executed. And it is not only this problem. We have a big problem about the killing the people outside the law. We have thousands of people in mass killing by the regime, and we have more than 1,136 people died in the detention due to the torture and mass medical treatment. So, how you can say about this is, we are not talking about Iran. Egypt is not Iran. Egypt is a line for the Western, is a second country, receive military aids from US, and it is a big partner for EU. So how you can say about this is double standard about from the international community, about the silence, about this is mass killing by the Egyptian regime now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. While I can ask for the microphone to go to the gentleman at the center there. Thank you. No, thank you for your point and drawing to everybody's attention the situation in Egypt. It's very important, and I think we've all been trying to highlight it more and more. But point taken, and we'll try to be louder on Egypt as well, and we can connect later. Thank you.
My name is Don Vinh Trần Đô from the Federation of the Vietnamese Refugees in Germany. I would like to thank you very much for all your statements. And I have a little question to Professor Wu from Vietnam. I have understood this, that you have said it's very difficult to improve the situation in Vietnam. And we all understand this under this system. But let us think also about the future of our children and about our students. And so I would like to ask you, what can we, or what can you say to the children, to the young people, to your students, so that they can go in dignity in future with the international community about the team human rights and about that penalty? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Can I hand over to you to answer? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very good question. And it's a very direct question to me because I'm working for the university. Yet, actually, we understand the importance of how to say human rights education for young generation in Vietnam, and we have done it for, I think it's a quite long time. Our law school is the first university of Vietnam teaching human rights, and we have how to say the human rights program, education program for undergraduate students, and we have a separate master program in human rights. So we do teaching a lot of issue of human rights, including of death penalty abolition. And in our program, we provide them with I think it's a very liberal idea of human rights, including the international human rights standard in general and international standard on death penalty abolition as well. And I think we make some contribution to, how to say, changing the mindset of young generation of Vietnam in terms of human rights in general and death penalty in particular. However, the important is that, you know, in the very special context of Vietnam, if you want to change the policy like the death penalty, you must, how to say, focus on or impact on the policy maker. So young generation have very little voice. Their voice is not even some civil society organization have a very little impact on the policy maker. So comparing to the young generation. So I think, however, we are continuing to we are still working on that. But I don't think that by, how to say, human rights education, we can make change of, how to say, the death penalty, in particular human rights issue in general, immediately, like the immediate action in Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all your work. I'm going to close the session because I think we're quite tired. Just want to thank you all in the panel for joining me today, and thanks to all of you for your patience. We continue tomorrow at 9:30, and that's it. So thank you very much for all the speakers. Thank you.